Maya, sunshine, wake up. We need to hurry. I shook my 6-year-old daughter's shoulder, trying to wake her. The clock showed 6:45 in the morning, and we needed to be in court by 8:30. That damn parking ticket had been hanging over our heads like a sword of Damocles for the past 2 weeks. The memory of that evening is still vivid in my mind. Maya was choking from coughing, her temperature nearly 104 degrees, and the only 24-hour pharmacy in the neighborhood was 3 blocks away. I remember trying to find a parking spot with trembling hands, but all the regular spaces were taken. Near the entrance, there was a blue handicapped parking sign. Just 5 minutes, I thought then. What could happen in 5 minutes? The apartment greeted me with its usual chaos. Maya's scattered toys, a mountain of unwashed dishes in the sink, utility bills on the kitchen table. The past year had been particularly tough. After my hours were cut at the cafe, money barely covered the essentials. And now this ticket, $200 that I simply don't have. In the bathroom, I met my reflection's gaze. 32 years old, but looking 40. Dark circles under my eyes, wrinkles at the corners of my mouth, gray hairs at my temples. Single motherhood had aged me prematurely. Mr. Thompson, I couldn't leave my sick child alone. I rehearsed my speech in front of the mirror. Yes, I know it was a handicapped spot, but it was an emergency. Documents. A whole stack of medical records proving Maya's chronic bronchitis lay on the edge of the sink. I started sorting them into a worn folder. Test results, prescriptions, doctor's reports. Each paper, evidence of our struggle. Each bill, another hole in our already leaky budget. Mom, I'm hungry. Maya's sleepy voice interrupted my thoughts. She stood in the bathroom doorway, hugging her tattered plush rabbit named Donut to her chest. I'd bought that rabbit at a thrift store for $2, but for Maya, it was more precious than all the toys in the world. Sweetie, we'll eat later. Right now we need to hurry. I crouched down in front of my daughter, fixing her messy blonde hair, as blonde as her father's. Darius had vanished from our lives before Maya was born, taking all our savings and leaving behind only these cursed genes. Where are we hurrying to? Maya yawned, rubbing her eyes with her free hand. Remember we talked about an important meeting? With the judge? Is that the mean man who wants to take our medicine money? I flinched at her childlike directness. Not mean, just, it's his job. Let's get dressed quickly. I laid out your favorite blue dress. The dress was a gift from Mrs. Rodriguez, our upstairs neighbor. The kind, elderly Mexican woman often watched Maya when I picked up extra shifts at the cafe. It's practically new, Mrs. Rodriguez had said then, holding out the carefully ironed dress. My granddaughter only wore it a couple of times. I nearly burst into tears of gratitude at that moment. The next 30 minutes turned into a real marathon. While Maya struggled with the dress buttons, I rushed between rooms, gathering everything we needed. The hairbrush got stuck in my daughter's tangled hair, causing a flood of tears. Her favorite shoes had mysteriously disappeared, and time kept rushing forward mercilessly. Mom, is the judge scary? Maya asked when I finally managed the last button. They say he's very strict. I bit my lip, remembering everything I'd read about Judge Callisto the night before. The forums were filled with comments, ruthless, always goes by the book, doesn't accept excuses. Some advised not to even bother contesting tickets. Callisto always sided with the law. Like Miss Parker? Maya wrinkled her nose. She's strict too, but she let me draw after nap time when I behaved well. I remembered my recent conversation with Miss Parker. She had tactfully hinted at the daycare debt. Another $150 that I simply didn't have. If only it were that simple, sweetheart. At 7:45, we began our descent down our old building staircase. The elevator was broken, as usual, for flights of stairs that seemed endless, especially with a sleepy Maya stopping at every step. On the second floor, Mrs. Rodriguez intersected us while walking her chihuahua. Good luck, honey. She hugged me tight, and I caught the familiar scent of cinnamon and vanilla. I'll be praying for you. Thank you, Mrs. Rodriguez. I barely held back the approaching tears. Mom, my tummy's growling, Maya complained when we finally made it outside. The morning air was fresh and cool. Somewhere in the distance, subway trains rumbled, beginning their daily marathon through the city. I opened the door of my old 2010 Ford, the only inheritance from my father after his sudden death 3 years ago. The car greeted us with its familiar creak and the scent of the artificial pine tree hanging from the rearview mirror. I know, sunshine. Maybe we can get something on the way. I checked my wallet. $47.23. All we had until the next paycheck. Maybe even a hamburger. Really? Maya's eyes lit up. Hamburgers were a rare luxury in our life. Usually, we ate the cheapest food from the supermarket and leftovers from the cafe that they sometimes allowed us to take home. Starting the car, I caught another glimpse of that ticket in the rearview mirror. $200. For some people, that's the cost of a dinner at a restaurant or a new pair of shoes. For us, it was a catastrophe that could derail our carefully constructed budget. Chicago's morning streets greeted us with their usual traffic jams. Endless lines of cars crawled slowly toward downtown. Every traffic light felt like an eternity, every minute of delay sending panic through my stomach. "Mom, look, there's McDonald's," Maya suddenly exclaimed, pointing at the familiar yellow M. I glanced at the clock. 8:05. 25 minutes until the hearing, and we were almost there. The traffic light helpfully blinked green, inviting us to turn into the fast food restaurant's parking lot. My hand automatically moved to the turn signal. McDonald's was unusually empty at this hour, just a couple of office workers hurriedly drinking coffee by the window. Maya held tightly to my hand as we stood in line, examining the bright pictures of new menu items. 2 cheeseburgers and a small orange juice, $9.23. Another dent in the budget, but I couldn't let my child go hungry before such an important day. "Miss Parker says breakfast is the most important meal of the day," Maya said seriously, unwrapping her burger in the car. "Yes, sunshine, she's right." I tried to smile, taking a bite of my burger. I could barely taste it. My stomach was knotted with anxiety. "Mom, why can't we just tell the judge I was sick? That's why you stopped at the pharmacy, right?" I looked at my daughter through the mirror. In the morning light, Maya looked especially fragile. The dark circles under her eyes, traces of her last attack, still hadn't completely faded. "It's not that simple, sweetie. There are rules." "But you were rushing to get medicine." I was coughing so hard. I remembered that evening, how I rushed through the pharmacy searching for the right medicines, how my trembling hands counted out the last of our money, how I hurried back to the car, praying there wouldn't be a ticket. But there it was, attached to the windshield. It fluttered in the wind like a flag of my defeat. "I know, sunshine, but handicapped spots, they're special. For people who really, really need them." Didn't we really, really need it? Maya's child logic was flawless in its simplicity. I didn't answer. The courthouse already loomed before us, gray, monumental, overwhelming in its size. After parking in the public lot, I took wet wipes from the glove compartment and carefully cleaned Maya's face and hands. We couldn't appear in court looking unkempt. "Okay, let's check if we have everything." I opened my bag for the 100th time. Medical records from Dr. Brown, prescriptions, pharmacy receipts, work pay statements, documents, documents, documents. My whole life laid out in folders and files. Here's the proof that I'm a single mother. Maya's birth certificate with a dash in the father field. Pay statement from Johnny's Cafe where I've worked for 4 years. $8 an hour plus tips, when customers aren't too stingy. A small line had already formed at the courthouse entrance. People with folders and briefcases, women in formal suits, a man in worn jeans nervously fidgeting with his summons. They all came here for justice, or for mercy. "Bags and metal objects on the belt," the security guard monotonously announced, not even looking at us. I helped Maya through the metal detector while trying to fasten a button on her dress that had treacherously come undone. "4th floor, room 47B, I read from the summons. The elevator was cramped and stuffy. It smelled of expensive perfume from a woman in a business suit and coffee from a man with a briefcase. In my only decent dress, bought on sale 2 years ago, I felt especially out of place. "Mom, will this take long?" Maya asked as we settled on the hard bench outside the courtroom. No, sweetie. The judge will just listen to us and make a decision. And then can we go to the park? I swallowed the lump in my throat. Our little tradition. Every Saturday when I had a day off, we would go to the park. Swings, dollar ice cream, feeding ducks with leftover bread. Simple joys we could afford. Case number 47, Nia Thompson. The clerk's voice called out, and my knees went weak. Clutching the folder of documents in one hand and Maya's little palm in the other, I headed toward the courtroom doors. One last time, I checked my reflection in the glass door. Disheveled hair, pale face, traces of sleepless nights under my eyes. God, give me strength, I whispered, pushing open the heavy door. The courtroom greeted us with the chill of air conditioning and the smell of wood polish. High ceilings, massive wooden panels on the walls, rows of empty benches. Everything here was designed to inspire reverence for the law, or fear of it. All rise. Court is in session. The clerk's loud voice made Maya jump and squeeze my hand tighter. Judge Callisto entered through a side door, a tall man with graying temples and a square jaw. His black robe swayed slightly as he walked. He took his place behind the high bench and began reviewing some papers, not even sparing us a glance. Case number 47, the clerk announced. Administrative violation. Parking in a handicapped space without proper authorization. Defendant, Nia Thompson. Mrs. Thompson, Judge Callisto's voice was deep and measured. Do you acknowledge the parking violation? I took a deep breath. For the past 2 weeks, I had rehearsed this moment, played out different response scenarios in my head. But now, standing before this man who held our financial well-being in his hands, all my prepared words seemed to evaporate. Yes, Your Honor, but… So you acknowledge it, he made a note in his papers. The fine is $200. Are you prepared to pay it today? Your Honor, I'd like to explain the situation, my voice trembled, but I forced myself to continue. That evening, my daughter, Mrs. Thompson, Judge Callisto looked at me for the first time. The law is crystal clear. Handicap spaces are exclusively for people with proper permits. Do you have such a permit? No, but… Then I don't see what there is to discuss. I felt a lump forming in my throat. In the folder I was clutching desperately were all the proofs of our desperate situation. Maya's medical records, prescription receipts, work pay stubs, but the judge seemed uninterested in any of this. Your Honor, please. I opened the folder with trembling hands. I have documents. Mrs. Thompson, the documents are irrelevant to the fact of violation. You parked in a handicapped space without proper authorization. That's a violation of the law. Mommy parked there because I was really sick. Maya's clear voice suddenly rang out. She stepped forward, still holding my hand. I was feeling so bad. I was coughing so hard. A silence fell over the courtroom. Judge Callisto truly looked at us for the first time. Not as another case number, but as real people. Young lady, his voice softened slightly. What's your name? Maya, she answered, showing no trace of fear. Are you the strict judge Mommy talked about? I saw something like a smile appear at the corners of Judge Callisto's lips. Yes, I'm the judge. And I have to make sure everyone follows the law. But Mommy didn't want to break the law. Maya took another step forward. There just weren't any other parking spaces at the pharmacy, and I needed medicine. I was coughing so hard I couldn't even talk. Judge Callisto leaned back in his chair, studying my daughter carefully. I noticed his gaze drift over her pale face, the dark circles under her eyes, traces of her recent illness. Mrs. Thompson, he finally said, tell me more about that situation. I started speaking, trying to keep my voice steady. I told him about that evening, about Maya's sudden attack, about how her temperature kept rising higher and higher, about how I frantically searched the city for an open pharmacy because our usual one had already closed. Show me the documents, Judge Callisto unexpectedly requested. I hurriedly started pulling papers from my folder, nearly dropping them in my nervousness. Medical records with Maya's diagnosis, prescriptions, pharmacy receipts. My daughter has chronic bronchitis, Your Honor. That evening, She had a particularly severe attack. Temperature near 104. She was choking from coughing. The judge studied the documents carefully, occasionally making notes. His face remained impassive, but I noticed his brows furrow slightly when he reached the medicine bills. "Mr. Judge," Maya spoke up again, "can I show you something?" Without waiting for permission, she reached into her small backpack and pulled out her inhaler. "This is my special medicine. Mommy says it helps me breathe when it gets hard. That evening it ran out, that's why we were rushing to the pharmacy." "Mom, I'm hungry," she suddenly added, and her stomach audibly growled throughout the courtroom. I felt my cheeks flush with embarrassment. 2 small cheeseburgers clearly weren't enough breakfast for a growing child. "I apologize, Your Honor," I mumbled. "We were in a bit of a rush this morning." Judge Callisto looked at his watch, then at Maya, then back at the documents. "The court will take a 15-minute recess," he suddenly announced. "Mrs. Thompson, I want to review these materials in more detail." When we stepped into the hallway, I noticed the judge quietly say something to his clerk, who quickly left through a side door. "Mom, can we buy something to eat?" Maya asked, hopefully looking at the vending machine at the end of the hallway. I opened my wallet. After the morning burgers, less than $40 remained. All our money until the next paycheck. "If the judge doesn't waive the fine..." "Excuse me," a voice behind me said. It was the judge's clerk, holding a large paper bag. "Judge Callisto asked me to give this to your daughter." Inside were sandwiches, apples, and a bottle of juice. I felt tears welling up in my eyes. "Please convey our thanks to the judge," I whispered. We spent the next 10 minutes on a bench in the hallway. Maya ate her sandwich with appetite while I tried to collect my thoughts. Something had changed in the atmosphere after Maya's appearance. Maybe all wasn't lost yet? "Court is back in session," the clerk announced exactly 15 minutes later. When we returned to the courtroom, I noticed that Judge Callisto had arranged all my documents in some specific order before him. His gaze was no longer as cold. "Mrs. Thompson," he began, "I've carefully reviewed the materials you provided. The medical records show that your daughter indeed suffers from a serious chronic condition. The pharmacy receipts demonstrate regular significant expenses for medication. Your work statement indicates that your income," he paused, "is quite modest for a single mother with a sick child." I nodded silently, afraid to speak a word. "The law exists to protect citizens' rights," the judge continued, "including the rights of disabled people to access necessary infrastructure. However," he looked at Maya again, who was still holding her half-eaten sandwich, "the law must also consider special circumstances and human factors." "Mr. Judge, can I tell you about my mommy?" Maya set aside her unfinished sandwich and looked at Judge Callisto with her big brown eyes. I tensed. In her 6 years, Maya had seen and heard more than a child her age should have. And like all children, she was brutally honest. "Of course, young lady," the judge leaned forward, showing genuine interest. "Tell me about your mother." "Mommy gets very tired," Maya began, fidgeting with the hem of her blue dress. "She works at a cafe where they serve pancakes and coffee. Sometimes she brings me cookies that are left over at night, but only when Mr. Johnny allows it." I felt my cheeks flush. It was one thing to talk about my own hardships, and quite another to hear it from my own child. "And Mommy works at night too," Maya continued. "She thinks I'm sleeping, but sometimes I wake up and see her washing other people's things. Lots and lots of things. Mrs. Rodriguez says Mommy takes in laundry to earn extra money." Judge Callisto shifted his gaze to me. Something like understanding appeared in his eyes. "We used to have savings." I decided to explain the situation completely. I'd been saving for Maya's education since she was born. A little bit every month. It wasn't easy on a waitress's salary, but I managed. "And then Uncle Darius came," Maya chimed in again. "Mommy says he was Aunt Sarah's friend." I flinched. This was the part of the story I'd preferred not to remember. "Aunt Sarah is my younger sister," I explained to the judge, feeling a lump in my throat. "She brought Darius to a family dinner 6 months ago. He seemed so reliable. Talked about how important it was to invest in the future, how savings could be multiplied. And Mommy gave him money." Maya blurted out, all my school money. And then Uncle Darius disappeared, and Aunt Sarah disappeared too. Maya. I tried to stop my daughter, but it was too late. Is this true? Judge Callisto asked, looking at me intently. I nodded, feeling treacherous tears beginning to blur my vision. $15,000. All our savings from 6 years. He showed some documents, profit charts, promised to double the amount in a year. Then a week later, both he and my sister just vanished. We filed a police report. I pulled another document from my folder, but they said such cases are hard to solve. That scammers usually operate through shell companies, fake documents. By the time an investigation starts, the money's impossible to trace. And then I got sick, Maya added. Really, really sick. Mommy says it's because we moved to an apartment that's damp and cold. But we can't afford anything else. Judge Callisto carefully studied the police report, occasionally making notes in his notepad. And since then you've been trying to manage on your own? He asked, looking up at me. Yes, Your Honor. I take extra shifts at the cafe when possible. I do laundry for people. Sometimes I clean offices on weekends if Mrs. Rodriguez can watch Maya. And Mommy barely sleeps. Maya interjected again. I hear her walking around at night, counting money and crying. She thinks I don't know, but I do. I felt a lump forming in my throat. All these months, I tried to stay strong for my daughter. But sometimes, late at night, when the exhaustion and despair became unbearable, Mommy says everything will be okay, Maya continued. But I saw her sell her pretty earrings, the ones from Grandma, and she traded her phone for an old one. And, she hesitated, and we had to sell my bicycle too, though Mommy promised she'd buy a new one when we have money. Maya, sweetie. I tried to stop this flood of revelations, but my daughter was determined to tell everything. And Mommy doesn't go to the doctor, even when her head or back hurts. Says the medicine is more important for me. And she doesn't go to the hair salon, cuts her hair herself at home. And, enough, Judge Callisto gently interrupted her. He removed his glasses and tiredly rubbed the bridge of his nose. Mrs. Thompson, why haven't you applied for social assistance? I tried. I pulled out another document from my folder. But the application review process takes a long time. And meanwhile, you need to somehow live, the judge finished for me. Pay rent, buy food, medicine. Mr. Judge, Maya suddenly stood up from her seat and approached the judge's bench. Do you know what an inhaler is? The judge seemed slightly taken aback by such a direct question. Well, it's a device that helps people breathe. Right. Mine costs a lot. Mommy says almost $200. That's as much as this silly fine, she frowned. If Mommy pays the fine, we won't be able to buy a new inhaler when this one runs out. And without it, I start choking. Like that evening, I noticed something shift in Judge Callisto's expression. He looked at the documents spread before him, then at Maya, then at me. Mrs. Thompson, he finally said. I see here a statement from the daycare. Do you have outstanding payments? Yes, Your Honor. $150 for last month. Miss Parker is understanding of my situation. But the daycare isn't a charity organization either, the judge nodded. And what about your apartment rent? I'm a bit behind on payments. Mr. Kowalski, our landlord, is being patient for now. Says I've been a good tenant, always paid on time before all this. Judge Callisto wrote something in his notepad, then looked carefully at his watch. I think we have enough information to make a decision. But before we continue, he turned to his clerk. James, would you please bring another sandwich for Miss Maya? And perhaps some coffee for her mother. We still have matters to discuss. Before we continue, Judge Callisto removed his glasses and placed them on the desk. I'd like to clarify a few points. Mrs. Thompson, would you allow me to speak with your daughter privately? I looked at Maya uncertainly. In her 6 years of life, I'd rarely let her out of my sight for more than a few minutes. Don't worry, the judge added softly, noticing my concern. My clerk will escort you to the adjacent room where you can have your coffee. It won't take long. Maya nodded confidently. It's okay, Mom. Mr. Judge seems nice. He gave me a sandwich, I left the courtroom on shaky legs. The clerk led me to a small office where a steaming cup of coffee already waited on the desk. Real coffee, not the swill I usually drink during breaks between shifts at the cafe. Through the soundproof door, I could see Judge Callisto step down from his elevated position and sit next to Maya on the bench. She was animatedly telling him something, gesturing with her hands, while he listened attentively, occasionally nodding. 15 minutes passed, feeling like an eternity, before the door opened and the clerk invited me back in. When I entered the courtroom, Maya sat in her place with a satisfied smile, and Judge Callisto had returned to his position behind the bench. But something had changed. There was something new in his gaze, perhaps understanding? "Mrs. Thompson," he began in an official tone, "your daughter told me many interesting things. For instance, about how you teach her to read using store signs because you can't afford to buy children's books. About how you make her toys from things you find at home. About how you work nights but always find time to sing her a lullaby." I felt my cheeks flush. Maya truly noticed everything. She also told me about your weekly ritual in the park. About how you collect fallen leaves and make collages from them. How you feed the ducks with leftover bread from the cafe. How you wish upon falling stars because it's free. The judge paused, reviewing some papers on his desk. "You know, Mrs. Thompson, in 20 years of serving in this courtroom, I've seen many people. Some come here with stories of hardship, hoping to avoid responsibility for their actions. Others try to manipulate the system. Still others simply disrespect the law." He put his glasses back on and looked at me carefully. "But sometimes people come here who find themselves in impossible situations through no fault of their own. People who, despite all difficulties, keep fighting. Not for themselves, for their children." Maya suddenly stood up and approached the judge's bench. "Mr. Judge, can I show you my drawing? I drew it while you were talking to Mommy." Judge Callisto nodded, and Maya handed him a folded piece of paper she'd pulled from her dress pocket. It was a McDonald's receipt with something drawn in pencil on the back. "This is us," she proudly announced, pointing to 3 figures. "Here's Mommy, here's me, and here's you. See, you're smiling. And you're not wearing that scary black clothes." I noticed the corners of the judge's lips twitch in a barely visible smile. He carefully placed the drawing before him and cleared his throat. "Mrs. Thompson, please stand." His voice became official again. "The court is ready to render a decision in your case." I rose on trembling legs. This moment would determine whether we could buy Maya a new inhaler next month, whether we could pay for daycare, whether we could. Taking into account all circumstances of the case, Judge Callisto began, namely, the emergency medical situation, confirmed by documents, the absence of malicious intent, this being a first parking violation, and the evident financial hardship. He paused. "The court has decided to waive the fine." My breath caught. Maya clapped her hands joyfully. "However," the judge continued, raising his hand to call for silence, "that's not all. James, please bring those materials we discussed." The clerk quickly left and returned with a folder of documents. "Mrs. Thompson, here is information about several social support programs. The Children's Health Insurance Program. It will help reduce Maya's medication costs. The Supplemental Nutrition Assistance Program. This will provide you with basic food supplies." And he pulled out another document, information about education grants for single mothers. "The local community college offers evening accounting courses. With such qualifications, you could find better paying work." I stood speechless, feeling tears rolling down my cheeks. "Mom, why are you crying?" Maya tugged worriedly at my sleeve. "Mr. Judge didn't punish us. These are happy tears, sunshine." I crouched down and hugged my daughter tightly. "Furthermore," added Judge Callisto, "I took the liberty of contacting Books for Kids. They provide free children's books to families in difficult situations. Maya told me she loves stories about princesses and dragons. Your Honor, I don't know how to thank you." "Don't thank me, Mrs. Thompson. Thank your daughter. She reminded me of something important." He looked at the drawing still lying before him. "That sometimes we need to see the person behind the letter of the law." Case closed. He struck his gavel. "And Maya, Don't forget to feed the ducks in the park. They're probably waiting for you. When we left the courthouse, the bright sun made us squint. Maya held my hand tightly, and in her other hand, she clutched the folder with information about assistance programs. Our ticket to a new life. Mom, she said, looking up at me, Mr. Judge isn't scary at all. He has a nice smile, doesn't he? Yes, sunshine. I smiled back. Yes, he does.